2020 order suspending certain provisions of Open Meeting Law GL 30A, Section 18 in the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Medfield Warrant Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. As a reminder, persons who would like to listen or view the meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. And I am going to go through slowly, hoping that Amanda comes to see who is here. So I am Sharon Tatro, and Christine.
I am Christine Barton.
Bob.
Bob Sliney.
Ed.
Ed Bozella.
Newton. And Newton, you are on mute, but we know that you're Newton Thompson.
Wow. Newton Thompson and Amanda's in the...
I was going to say, she just popped in.
He's
Okay,
here.
good.
I got
Okay.
here. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Jeremy.
Yeah, Jeremy Marcet.
Okay, and Amanda, who is now here.
Amanda Hall.
All right, sounds good. And recorded for your future viewing pleasure. So, so tonight we have several things we're going to try to get through. Do we want to just kind of jump right in? Because I see that Sarah's here. Was anybody else coming, Christine, or?
Yes, I'm going to be letting them in right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
so Sarah's here, the town planner, and then there's some members of the planning board. So Sarah's here to talk about two of the articles today, one being the request for $20,000 for the zoning diagnostic, and then the other is for the solar bylaw amendment. So, hi Sarah, how are you? I don't think she's in
Oh,
yet.
she's coming in yet. She hasn't come in yet. One by one. And Mr. Marcucci can come in anytime he wants. It's up to him. If he would like to hide for a while, he's welcome to hide.
I think that's everybody I have. I think we're.
Great. Hi Sarah,
Hey everybody, good to see you again. It's been a while.
How you doing, Sarah?
good to see you too.
Christine's been relaying all this stuff. Christine and I have talked quite a bit
Mhm.
this spring, but I actually wanted to introduce you to the members of the planning board that maybe you don't know yet. So Teresa James is on, she's the chair. And then Seth Meehan, he's one of our newer members. He's also on the historical commission. Two of our associate members are on, Blake McDermott and Jamie Sullivan. And I just got a text from Sarah Lemke saying that she's having a hard time getting on. I had emailed them the link earlier, but there was a little bit of a problem with it. So I just had to go to the website and I just emailed it to them. So hopefully she'll be on in a second. So just wanted to get the introduction. What is that? Let's see.
I think it's somebody's phone.
Okay. So let me just,
Unless you want to do this Robin Hood style.
yeah. Let me give you the brief introduction to the solar bylaw. That's the primary zoning article that you haven't had a chance to review yet. It's a little bit more complicated, obviously, and the fact that you haven't seen it yet. Probably many of you haven't paid much attention to the solar bylaw. We have an existing solar bylaw that was adopted in 2014 as part of efforts to comply with the Green Communities Act. So that act required that the town pass a bylaw for large-scale solar ground-mounted facilities that allows by right and with site plan approval. So that's what we did in 2014. We haven't actually approved any of our installations under that bylaw because the threshold is 250 kilowatts, and the only ground mounted system that we have so far is the the ground mounted system at the wastewater treatment facility, which clocked in at just under 250 kilowatts. So it was actually just approved by right through the building permit process. But we had been speaking with a couple of potential applicants, one being the folks at the Kingsbury Club who wanted to do solar parking canopies, and also potentially the town of Medfield being another applicant that would like to use land at the landfill and some potential projects at the school parking lots, again, solar parking canopies. So the planning board engaged the services of some consultants. They're, regional planners from our regional planning agency, MAPC, that helped us understand the technology as well as the potential permitting processes for all different types of solar installations. So that was regrouping keeping the large scale, but then adding two other scales, medium scale and small scale. So a small scale installation ground mounted system would be up to 10 kilowatts. And then a medium scale would be everything in between 10 to 250 kilowatts. And we created a designation for the solar parking canopies, as well as making it explicit that all rooftop installations are considered by right. So there's different zoning districts and different designations for the installations. But it was it's meant to just sort of clarify and also making things a little bit more user-friendly and understandable for both residents and potential developers. Yeah, okay, I think Sarah just showed up. Okay. So do you have any questions about that? I think Christine passed along a question about small scale being allowed by right in all zoning districts. And just to clarify, that was something that was permissible anyway. So it's just a little bit more obvious. As long as you are citing your installation in the, with the proper setbacks. Also, just for context, we worked with the some members of the Energy Committee on this and got their sign off on it, basically endorsement of it. So we'll be able to keep our green communities designation, but the hope is that more people will be able to do installations, and then that the installations get permitted best within the context of their sort of neighborhood. So residential installations aren't too big, and then sort of the medium scale ones get reviewed based on where they're located, whether or not they're in an IE zoning district, which is the more industrial, versus business districts. They're based special permits, so it's a discretionary permit. So if it really doesn't make sense for that location, the permit doesn't need to be approved, but it would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis based on the proposal. Not really sure also what to anticipate for potential applications. We had the large scale on the books for 6 years, and we haven't used it yet. but we've had a number of installations that have been installed in town based on just what's allowed under the building code. So that was, and Jeremy, you're in Natick, right? So I think this bylaw is kind of based off of the small, medium, and large scales that were done in Natick. I think we worked with the same people who drafted yours.
I believe so, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's in place in Natick currently.
Yeah.
Did this have through the planning board, did this have a hearing and a vote of support from the planning board?
Yeah, the planning board had 3 public hearings on it. And we worked out the language during all 3. The third one was just kind of reviewing it, but there was a couple of, rabbit hole type of hearings where we were like, is this what we mean to say? And, because I think the technology threw us all, because we understand that the technology has changed so much in the past 6 years when we last understood and learned about solar installations, and then we know that it's going to change so much more in the future too. And we got a little bit of public participation, mostly from the Energy Committee.
So Sarah, my recollection of the discussion that evening, the concern was, or the question was, can a next door neighbor just put a canopy in their driveway or in their front yard? Or
Yep, you would have to follow not so much in the front yard, because you have to follow the setbacks for accessory structures. So setbacks for accessory structures are actually 60 feet from your front yard, and then your rear, depending on your zoning district, somewhere in the 20 to 40 range, and then side is 12 to 15. So it is possible that your neighbor could put them on their property, but it gets cited the same way like a shed gets cited.
yeah.
Most people find rooftops are a little bit more palatable, not only for them, but also for their neighborhoods, because you usually have a little bit more square footage to work with. If you're going to go through the process of having an installation, a rooftop would probably generate more energy than a small scale installation. From what we understand, a typical size panel, 10 megawatts is just about 2 panels. So it's not that big. It's probably the size of a shed rooftop. So. And I don't think, I'd have to check with the building commissioner, but I don't believe anybody has actually just done an installation, a ground mounted installation in a residential property. We did through the ZBA, we had somebody request a variance for a what's called a solar tracker, which is kind of looks like a satellite because it moves with the sun. It stays stationary, but then the panel moves throughout the day, and they wanted to place it within their front setback, which required a variance hearing in a neighborhood public meeting, but it didn't pass. It wasn't appropriate for the location where it was proposed in. So that would be the relief avenue if someone wanted to deviate from the regular setbacks. There are other standards that are written into the bylaw that the planning board can review on a case-by-case basis, but it's only for certain types of installations, like the medium scale and the canopies that would go over parking lots.
Sarah, I know you had mentioned our collaboration with the Medfield Energy Group, but one public participant actually works for Eversource, and they actually reviewed it internally for it at one of her, just to look for the language and the definitions, and they gave it a positive review.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I only have a question for Jeremy. So has there been any lessons learned from Natick that we need to make sure that
It actually, the one applicant that's taken advantage of this the most has actually been the town of Natick, in installing, canopies over parking lots and such. So generally, there's been really no controversy over it, with folks proposing these, locations that might not be appropriate. So it's been received well in Natick.
Great.
Yeah, that was the big impetus for the planning board taking on this project at this time, was to help out, administration, selectmen, energy committee in their endeavors to make it possible. Lay some, framework there that wasn't otherwise in place. I don't know if you realize this or not, but the landfill, which is a potential site for a solar farm, it's not in the industrial zone where the large scale installations are currently allowed. So we definitely needed to change that in order to be able to potentially make it happen. So, and then
Sarah,
I'll get one-
on some of the, if we put it on any of the municipal properties, it would be revenue generating for our town, right?
for sure. Yep. Yeah. And I want to
Great.
make a point that this is one example where the planning boards, or now the planning department's consultant fund was used for other purposes. We were able to take this project on and pay for the consultants out of the planning board's fund. So this is one of the things that that it gets used for. Yeah. So I'm just
Great.
gonna if you have any, do you have any questions on that?
I don't think so. I think you can probably move on to next
Okay.
topic if you would like.
All right, so the zoning diagnostic. The zoning diagnostic is a tool that the planning board can use as we strive to make further amendments to the zoning bylaw. Excuse me one second. Where we just recently completed a master planning process where where we came up with a number of potential zoning amendments that we think would be helpful in the mission of the master plan, but also the mission of the planning board, long range planning. And one of the sort of pieces of guidance that the consultants gave us was to do this zoning diagnostic, which would basically look for inconsistencies and outdated language, things that may conflict with state and federal laws, in order to then have a really good basis of making future zoning changes. So it's sort of like trying to start with a clean slate. It makes a lot of sense to try to do it now because there are a number of zoning amendments that we would like to do over the next several years. It's definitely not a must-have per se, but is something that is important to the board, to me as the planner, in order to be able to set the stage for the next few years of work. We could try to fund it in multiple parts out of our consultant line item, but that line item just isn't large enough to cover this particular project, so we would need to supplement it. So we're asking for the quote that we got was between $15,000 and $20,000. So we're asking for that amount from the Warrant Committee, but would certainly try to work with you guys in being able to fund it in however we can, whether it's partial supplement through the Warrant Committee and then using our consultant budget in various ways.
So this is a piece of software, I assume.
No. This
No?
is actually a zoning consultant would come in.
Oh, a consultant.
And-
Okay.
Yeah, and actually review our existing zoning bylaws and be able to make recommendations on how to make our zoning bylaw better. Sometimes it's more user-friendly, more readable. To my knowledge, we have not, so I've been in Medfield for 8 years, and we've only added and edited the bylaw, not really taken a close examination of the document itself to make sure that it's doing exactly what we want it to do. It's really important, especially when doing long range planning, is to make sure that your zoning matches your planning objectives. And sometimes they don't. And it would be great to have a third party, an expert in zoning, take a look at it for us.
So this is a kind of like a one-time consultant, and then maybe every 3 to 5 years you do it again?
I would
Because the
say
laws change?
I would probably say it's a little bit longer, where we have the zoning consultant review the zoning bylaw in and of itself. But I would imagine, and there would be need for other zoning consultants for other types of technical zoning that we would want to pass down the road, which is something that we typically do anyway. Like we used the consultant to help us with the solar zoning, things that are specialized. So in those types of zoning consultants, we're typically able to just hire through our department budget. So this one's just a little bit more expensive, more of a one-off type of.
So Sarah, would you expect at the end of this that there would be proposals for changes to the bylaws or changes in, that would then come back to the
Yeah.
town for?
Yes, I
Is
do.
that the nature of the work that be done?
Yes, I do. Yeah, no, I haven't done a zoning diagnostic before, but I've done a little bit of research on other zoning diagnostics, and I got a scope from a consultant who does it. So basically, they're looking for structure and format, navigability, finding aids such as cross references, and ease of use, clarity of words, phrases, sections, and subsections, clarity of district provisions, which is the maps, uses, and dimensional tables, consistency throughout, use and placement of definitions, simplicity in approval processes, consistency with the zoning act and judicial decisions, and obsolete or missing provisions. Which actually, that's one of the things that I know is sort of deficient in our existing bylaw, is sort of like the modern uses that that are missing. Some of the terminology just doesn't exist, like doggy daycares or top of shop type of mixed use apartments, pop-up shops, things like that, things that we have been actually working with, food trucks, things like that, trying to sort of fit in with the modern vernacular, but just don't.
So would this be an RFP? Would you have a competitive bid for this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would be a procurement, because I think the dollar amount, I don't think would exceed $25,000 or whatever the medium threshold is. But yeah, there would be a procurement process that follows 30B.
Sarah, it's Newton. How are you this evening?
Hi, Newton.
Do you expect any, or can you project any economic benefits out of doing this front to back scrub and cleansing of our zoning bylaws?
I don't know if I could anticipate any economic benefit just from simply doing the diagnostic, but that is something that the planning board, we're all aware that we want to sort of foster in the next series of bylaw amendments, you know, mixed use, trying to create the type of bylaws that strengthen businesses in the downtown and our business districts. So, yeah.
So that this hygiene effort is good for business, should make it easier for developers or businesses to do business with Medfield.
Hopefully, yes.
So more local receipts.
I mean, I wouldn't hang my hat on that. But, you know, but truly, you know, the planning board and myself understands the balance between growth and development of Medfield that leads to, you know, more local receipts, new growth, you know, the type of things that help you out when you're dealing with the budget, but also preserving the, you know, the character of Medfield, if I can, you know, throw that one liner in there.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Good.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming, Sarah.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you,
Thanks,
planning board,
everybody.
too.
Thanks, Sarah.
The rest of the board for coming
Thanks
to
to your
support
board.
this.
Thank you, Board.
Take care.
Thank you. I'm thinking just because Mike Marcucci might have better things to do with his time, maybe we let him come in before yet, and then we'll talk about all these ones after. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Marcucci.
I just want to say, Sharon, that I could not imagine anything better, any better use of my time than spending it with you all. So
See,
Right,
anything's better than getting sucked into cleanup and after dinner
Yeah.
when you might have 9 people at your table every night.
no, this is just how I dress for dinner. Normally, I didn't have time to change for the meeting. So
Very good. Okay, so the next topic of conversation, why I asked Mr. Marcucci to help me with it, because even though I'm the chair of the Capital Budget Committee, I think that a lot of the brainchild into the 5-year plan and everything of that, Mr. Marcucci knows better than me, because I got onto this committee after that entire thing was in motion. So maybe we could just, because I think that we've had several questions kind of about why we have the plan and how it all kind of fits in. Like, would it be helpful for everybody if we put Mr. Marcucci on the spot and give us a 5-minute as to why we are where we are today? Is that helpful? Okay.
sure,
Are you willing to do that?
I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do
Okay.
that. So just, I think the current status of our capital planning kind of grew out of kind of a number of years of discussions and some measure of frustration on my part and others with the way we went about planning for capital expenses, because capital expenses should be predictable. They generally shouldn't pop up at the last minute. And there were several kind of notable instances over the course of my time on the Warrant Committee and then as a selectman where we had major expenses that sort of popped up out of the blue, either just before town meeting or at some point in the budget process. And so we and I and others kind of started to look at our overall approach to capital budgeting, because the way we used to do it, and I started in this as the Warrant Committee representative on the Capital Budget Committee. And the way we did it when I started, essentially the Capital Budget Committee wouldn't meet until February with a warrant hearing sometime in March, with the idea being we'd find out how much money was left over from the operating budgets and then try to squeeze the various capital budget requests in that remaining amount. And as a result, sort of the department heads had kind of gotten into a bad habit of not focusing or spending that much time on planning for any of their capital expenses. So you might have a truck with a useful life of 10 years, but the department head responsible for said truck couldn't necessarily tell you when it was going to need to be replaced. It didn't really appear on a schedule anywhere. And this was also part of the somewhat broader review. I was taking a look at kind of our accounting for long-term liabilities and planning for covering our long-term liabilities, of which the capital budget is one. And so as a result of this kind of last minute ad hoc approach, we, I think over a number of years, had underfunded our capital budget. We had a couple of things came up from time to time with departments trying to squeeze capital assets into their operating budgets, and when they desperately needed something, and requests would just kind of come in and they'd get sort of negotiated and how much money is left. There's 40,000 left. So some department head might raise his or her hand and say, well, we'll get this year. And so there wasn't a lot of forethought given kind of overall from the town perspective. So the idea was let's get a handle on everything that we possibly might have to cover in capital. So let's understand all the assets we have, how long they're going to last, when they're going to need to be replaced, and try to get on a regular schedule for replacing them. And a piece of this we did first with respect to the buildings, because we did not have an adequate budget for building maintenance, which had, again, and Mike Sullivan could do this better than I could, but had grown out of the fact that 25 years ago, if one of your buildings fell into disrepair, the Commonwealth would just pick up 70% of the cost to replace it for you. So there wasn't a huge incentive to maintain them. That's not true anymore. We're not getting as much money from the state, which is true for all of our budgets. That's declined precipitously over the last 20 to 30 years. And so there's a greater pressure on us to make sure we're taking care of it. So we did that on the building side with the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund, which is one piece of it. Because in the past, sort of building issues and trucks and other stuff would all be kind of under the capital label. Some would be squeezed into operating budgets. It was not organized in one place. So the idea was to get it all organized in one place, to put some pressure on the department heads to identify all of their capital spending ahead of time, so that we had an understanding that, okay, here's what's coming down the pike. Here's what's going to happen. If we have this fire truck that's 30 years old, we're going to have to replace it. And there ought to be a plan for replacing it. And there ought to be room in the budget looking ahead when it comes time to replace it, So we're not trying to squeeze $1 million fire truck into a $300,000 budget. And the flip side of that is if the department heads actually identified all of their capital things, pulled it out of the operating budgets, we have a better handle on the operating budgets, better handle on the various places that money is from where money is spent, and then be able to smooth it out. So that ideally, if you have a handle on all the potential spending, you can smooth it out. You have a longer lead time for departments to pursue grants to cover some of those costs. And then you have a basic sense, here's what our liability is. How do we match our revenues to our liability, either by creating more revenues through whatever, right? Through either through an override, through spending cuts, through asset sales, whatever it is, but we have to really understand what those liabilities are. And then we can evaluate them. Do we want to have this particular program that requires this machine? Do we want to provide this service that requires this particular truck? Rather than saying, well, we're going to try to provide the service and then piece it together and see what happens with the truck, or try to have this thing and then we'll scramble at the last minute to pay for it. So that was the idea, that if with respect to buildings, it'd be a 20-year plan. And we'd have 20 years. Here's the cost over 20 years. Here's how we try to figure out how to fund against those costs. Same thing on the capital side with 5 years. Here's what we're going to have to do over 5 years. Get it all in there. Try to have it be an even amount. We knew it couldn't happen in 1 year. Obviously, last year threw us for a big loop. But the idea was to get a stable, steady capital budget that actually matched what we needed. And then if we didn't need the stuff, to make the hard decisions, okay, if we can't afford to do this, if we can't afford this particular piece of equipment, then we have to think about whether we're really going to provide that service or not, and have a serious discussion about that. So that's kind of how we got here, sort of in an effort to, in my view, there is no need to do it on a year-by-year basis. You really should be able to identify when you're going to replace something. Obviously, emergencies happen. the unexpected happens, but there should be some predictability to it. And so if you do it in a 5-year basis, departments can put something on there 5 years ahead. We can evaluate it 5 years out and say, look, this is just not something we're going to do. We don't want to do this, so it's off, rather than, kind of in the past, you could have a lower priority item sneak into the capital budget because it happened to come along at the right time. So you might have something that really isn't a big high priority, but hey, it's $45,000 and we have $45,000, so let's spend it on this thing, even though it might be number 100 on the list. The idea of the longer term plan is to make sure we're really focusing on the stuff that we need, the assets that we really need to provide the services the town want to provide. So,
Thank you.
did I answer the question you asked, or did I just throw a lot of words at you?
I think you
Or
answered
both.
the question. I think you did. I think you did. And so the articles that we have in front of us, one is the very detailed list of what we're going to spend. One of them talks about the capital stabilization fund, which is more the long-term, how are we going to have a mechanism to be able to do this on a regular basis. So back before there was a pandemic, the capital stabilization fund, it had kind of been on the table, and we never discussed it much last year because the world blew up, and then we knew that we weren't going to be trying to fund it with an override like we did the municipal stabilization fund. So the new article, whichever number it is now, there's now a create and appropriate, Article 11, with $750,000. That is more than what's on the detailed list that Nick sent to everybody, because the whole idea is to create the fund, use $750,000 to fund it, but then not necessarily spend every penny of it, similar to how the municipal stabilization fund is. But I think it's important to note that this article is not like the municipal stabilization fund when we did it and it became a recurring million. This is like just $750 right now to get us through this year. Like, it's not over yet as to how we're going to fund it.
Right. And I'll just say, just for my part on this, I mean, I think ideally, I mean, if we can continue with the disciplined path that we're on as to free cash usage, and with some of the additional revenue sources that we're working on, I guess I'm more optimistic than I was a year ago about our ability to fund the stabilization fund without any additional tax revenue. If you look at the amount of free cash we've used in the past for operations, if we sort of wean ourselves off of that and can devote that to this stabilization fund and some of our other stabilization accounts, then we may be able to do it without any further ask to the taxpayers, which would be ideal. And particularly if we can identify a couple of additional non-tax sources of revenue, which are percolating out there, that would be dedicated to this as well and available for this, that may be possible to fund this without any additional taxpayer dollars, which would be good.
So specifically, Mike, what you're saying is last year we were talking about a specific override to get this thing off the rails, and at this point there's an opportunity with all the other activities ongoing that we wouldn't need to anticipate that override.
That's right. And I think going forward, if we can be disciplined about the free cash usage, continue to be disciplined in our spending so that we generate some of that free cash, and then identify some non-tax sources of lease revenue, for example, the dump being one of the examples that's on the article on the warrant for this year, that would generate some lease revenue that could be put into the stabilization account, but it also wouldn't be overfunded. So there'd still be incentives to the departments to continue to pursue grants aggressively, which we've done very successfully.
Yeah.
What's been the average for capital spending of this sort over the last few years?
The
I guess
average?
it counts a year that we did nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's been,
I don't know the average off the top of my head. I feel like it's only a couple 100,000 when you got to count in the year that was totally zero.
If you're looking at just tax levy, I mean, last year was 162,750. The year before, I have to pull out my book. I don't have that off the top of my head. But
Wasn't that the 0 year?
That would have been the 0 year, other than Park and Rec and Enterprise. And before that, it was consistently below the 400 and most of the times under the 300,000 mark.
And how did we arrive at the $750,000 number?
I think that so basically the entire amount, if, Nick, I don't know if you want to bring up the detailed list of what gets us to 707, which helps me answer Jeremy's question of how we ended up at 750. Last year when we were talking about this pre-pandemic, the number was actually $1 million. And the way that we kind of came up with the $1 million was that with the amount of projects in the 5-year plan over the years, even with $1 million a year, you're not going to fund them all. But, you know, could you live with 950? Could you live with 900? Could you live with $1 million? You know, it was just, I don't want to say it was a round number because it wasn't just a round number kind of thing, but because $1 million wasn't even going to get to there. So this year, if you look in the total equipment cost line, the entire amount, if we were going to do all these things the way we used to do them, it's $2.7 million, which again, we can't afford. And so in the capital budget discussions, we wanted to be able to afford a lot more of these things. So how could you do it creatively, which is why all of these leases came about. So when you applied all of those things, and then there were some items that had been requested that we had removed from the list, a few of them, this landed us at 707. And so in our last capital budget meeting, I mean, the reality is that because we really needed these things, nobody on the capital budget committee wanted to let go of any of these things that remain on this list, because a lot of them are pretty desperately needed. A lot of them have been waiting for a really long time. This is already a pared down list from what was asked for. And so in order to do the 707, we were kind of at least asking for that. And so I guess I'm just going to say 750 is more than 707. It leaves us a little bit more for next year, but this is where the 750 derives from. Is that fair to say, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I don't think it's pure science, Jeremy, right? I mean, it's,
No, I'm
it's-
just trying to get
yeah,
some basis for the number. It's, you know, it's certainly a big increase from what the past has been, and the past has not been adequate, certainly. So it just begs the question, you know, what is adequate? And with this being a more stable, predictable amount, the ability to plan going forward. So, you know, the 750, you know, at some point you're going to catch up pretty quick when we're leasing vehicles.
Well, yeah, that's,
So, you know, what is the discipline going to be at that point when we don't need to spend 750 yet? And I guess can you just explain the chart a little bit just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, that most of the items on here are not being bought outright by cash. Most of these are being financed. So are we creating kind of a leverage issue that might affect our bond rating? We currently have like $5 million principal and interest on the town budget, yet, you know, this 1 year alone could add, I mean, you're talking to 2.7 million in levered money. And some of these vehicles, you know, these costs are not just, when we talk about the cost for FY22, these are tied in for 3 years, for 7 years,
Right.
for 10 years. These are locked in. And, you know, at the end of a 3-year lease for a police vehicle, it's gone. It's gone. And, you know, the vehicle has 60,000 miles on it after 3 years. It's, you know, maybe it's bought out, maybe not.
so,
And we did three police vehicles last year, correct? So that we'd have
we did.
6.
we had two engines. Those top 2 items were last year's articles, were they not?
Correct.
And those,
That's correct.
so very little.
So,
of
and
this-
so, yeah, so some of
very
these
little
where
of
it
this
says,
is 2022, yeah.
some of them are. I mean, I guess, Jeremy, my opinion on, we have not done these things for so long and we need them. And we don't have $2.7 million to be able to do this right now. And I'm actually kind of okay with being locked in because it forces us to do it. It doesn't allow us to have a year where we can say, no, we can't do it. Now, right now, today, one of the reasons why we were talking about this is because the interest rate is so low. So if we get to a point a few years down the road and those leases are gone and the money's in a different situation, then maybe we go back to buying. But I feel like we really need these things. And if this is the way to get them, I'm okay with that personally.
I
I mean,
think,
even at 2% though, I mean, it's the beauty of a capital stabilization account is you can buy things outright with cash,
Right.
not
Yeah.
financing, zero interest. It's just, you buy it, you own it, you use it for the life of the vehicle, planned replacement of that, but you're not fixed into a 3-year lease or the like. You can make that vehicle last as long as it's appropriate. And you're not eating into the dollars available by paying interest to the banks. So it's, for me, it's a little concerning that there's so many things on this list in this first year, so many things on this list that are financed or leased.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
I'll tell you, Jeremy,
worries me.
it's concerning to me too. Right? I mean, I would prefer, I don't know that I'd prefer to be spending 2.7 million, but the reality is with the amount of room we have in our budget, you know, we couldn't afford the 2 fire trucks, right? That would be 2 years of what we were doing for capital before. You know, we had gone several years without any new police vehicles. The fire trucks were essentially appeared nowhere, right? I mean, 3 years ago, if you looked at our capital planning, they're obviously fairly significant vehicles and they appeared nowhere, but they were obviously, you know, 30 plus years old and needed to be replaced. So I agree with you, it is concerning. And I think a lot of our discussions this year kind of recognize that we are compromising in the sense that not necessarily in the deal cutting sense, but in the trying to manage this capital budget within the overall fiscal situation of the town. And that's why I say I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do this without any additional tax revenue. I'm not certain that I will, but I'd like to give us that challenge. But I agree with you. I don't know that we want to be locked into leasing. And the nature of our discussion on the capital budget committee was that this is what we do this year. Interest rates were low. And again, I'd rather pay no interest, but given for how long we have underfunded these budgets, I don't think we could go another year without some of this stuff. Some of this stuff is pretty crucial to what we're doing. And then if you go without it, then you've given yourself a bigger deficit. So while we're adding some interest costs, it's modest relative to the overall budget and the overall need. And ideally, you're right. I mean, ideally next year and going forward, we won't have to do it that way.
So I guess it begs the, you know, maybe some sort of policy on how things are financed in the capital stabilization fund. You could see a larger purchase like a fire truck because it, eats in half the year allotment, but smaller vehicles like I hate to pick on the police vehicles, but those vehicles, you buy one outright instead of getting 3 and you phase in over the next 3 years, buying a vehicle a year, then you have multiple age vehicles and you're staggering their replacement. They don't all come up at the same time.
Yep.
So
I agree with you. I think that's right.
And I think those are a lot of the things that we talked about, especially when the police chief came, is that this is where we're trying to get to, that we can be on that replacement schedule and go back to the way it was 10, 15 years ago, where we just got one police vehicle each year and we maintained the fleet on a rotating basis. And then we dropped off doing that. So I think that is the plan, to get back to that approach.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to keep doing this forever, not like lease and lease and lease, but these 3 police vehicles right now are in, if we went back to the chief and said we're only getting 1, like, we're going to have a major problem on our hands with people just being able to function. Is that fair to say, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, we knew last year when she presented the vehicles to us that we were going to have a multi-year replacement of more than 1.
Yeah, and I think the schedule reflects the issue. I mean, Jeremy, you're 100%. I think couldn't agree with you more. But the problem is that when you're in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. And I think that's kind of where we found ourselves, in a huge hole on this capital budget. It had been pushed off and deferred, and the nature of the problems with the police vehicles, It just wasn't sustainable. And, of the 2.7 million, 1.1 or 1.2 of it is last year. So it shows what you're talking about, that, we're not addressing the problem 1 year at a time. We're carrying it forward. So $1.2 million of the capital spend is from last year carried forward. And then a question also is, in the context of being able to fund this, isn't there a correlation of the 750 with the amount of money that we could utilize from available cash to balance capital budgeting again with some of our stabilization and free cash to keep to meet the financial criteria that we have?
So currently, we would fund this first year of the capital stabilization fund with $750,000 from free cash.
Right, and that's an amount that's available because of, circumstances, but it also, we're limited in that respect of how much of the free cash to use, because it would put us out of policy, right?
Correct.
Although I do think on that, yeah, that's right, Bob. I think I'm going to be proposing some modest tweaks to the financial policy to account for some of these additional stabilization accounts, and welcome anybody's thoughts or comments about how we take them into account. I think we should, at least the balance in the accounts after whatever's appropriated from them at town meeting. And we have to address a little bit in the policy, the measurement date as well. So I think you're right that's part of the way we get to the number is how much we have to meet the reserve policy.
It'd be interesting to see a schedule that looks at the amount of remaining funds there will be, because let's assume 750 for the next few years. We know that if you just look at the first two line items, the 48 and the 60, there's $108,000 that's coming out this year, next year, and the year after, because it's 3 years worth of lease. So as and if you add up all of these lease commitments that we already have, you wonder how much of the 707 is prior, lease commitments versus new, I'll call it new capital. And I think by the
Nick
time you
has
get to
something
year
like that.
three-
I don't. Yeah.
by the time you get to year 3, there won't be $40,000 left of the 750 to spend.
Yeah.
Sharon, I'll distribute that into the committee. I did provide that. I'm sorry, I thought I would have included in this packet. I must not have attached it to the email.
But, I think, the point you're making, I think, and Mike, in your overview, it strikes me that it just shows the complexity of some of the issues that we have relative to, the lack of planning and the capital budgeting in the past, and the need to meet our financial targets, as well as addressing, as Jeremy mentioned, the debt financing, because these are complicated issues, but it seems to me that we should have some method of being able to, I guess, inform the town of these kinds of the balancing we're trying to do, because people hear money and they don't, oh, this goes there or that goes there, or where's it going? And this reflects a pretty, I would say, intricate management, a balance of what we can spend and what's available and what we need to have in reserve, and and looking off into the future, what we can continue to afford, particularly in a year when we're going to have such large issues such as the water treatment in the schools. So I don't know. I know you can over communicate in complexity, but I think if there's a way of presenting this, I think it would make some sense. But I think
that's a good point, Bob. And I think if we return to regular order at some point, I think part of at least the procedural piece of this capital planning process would have a lot of it done kind of at the beginning of the budgeting process. And so I would envision kind of a hearing in sort of October that would go over, here's what's coming up next year. And then here are the things that are being added to the budget for really 5 years from now. I mean, if it's working perfectly in a given year, you're really talking about what's going to be added to the budget 5 years hence, and then looking at the items that moved up from last year to this year on the plan, and then hopefully talking about which of those things are going to be funded by a grant that we just received and can come off that year's capital budget. But in general, I think that would be the vehicle for doing it, would be to have that happen around the same time as the original kickoff, right? The doom and gloom event would also be around the same time you'd be doing the capital budget. And so people can see not only what's coming in this year, but what's coming in the future. And it's just that obviously the last year and a half has not resembled regular order by any stretch.
No, I believe me, I think the progress, I can't imagine what we'd be doing if we didn't have this. So full credit for the initiative and young Nick and Christine and keeping this going forward, because this is critical items that we can't do on the fly, which that's what we're living with. All of a sudden we got 2 fire trucks and 6 police cruisers, and they're all misfunctioning.
Bob, I did suggest to them that we could take the line painting machine off, and then you could just walk around town and take care of it for everybody, but wasn't sure.
That'd be good. It would help me get my steps in too.
There you go.
I was hoping to cover my steps in the golf course, but let me think of an alternative.
I'll keep you in mind.
Okay. Does anybody, so let's see. Does anybody have any other questions about these articles? I think that there are only 2, right, Christine, now, because the appropriation and the creation are.
Creation and appropriation will be in the same article, similar
Same
to what
article.
we did municipal building stabilization.
Gotcha. Okay. So so that's the capital. So I don't know if, while we have Mr. Marcucci, we want to talk about the budget for a minute, or if Mr. Marcucci wants to run away.
I've got nowhere to go.
You have nowhere to go. You're stuck in your closet.
I'm in my walk-in closet here. There's no place to go.
For a year, I've been saying I'm going to drop off a poster to put behind you, and I never do. I got to think of something good.
Minimalistic, Sharon. It's a minimalistic background.
I know. So we forwarded around the information that Christine got about stimulus. So what I wanted to do today was I was going to give Christine and Nick some time, because I know they've got some stuff to talk about, CARES and things like that. But I just wanted to kind of say philosophically how I think that we go from here through the next 2 weeks is that clearly we need to vote on a balanced budget. We're starting today still off by 420, but there is a lot of money coming. We don't know exactly how we're going to be able to spend it, but we do know that it's more than 420. I do not want us to just say, well, then we're okay with the 420. I still want us to have a discussion on the line items, and even if there happens to be a line item that's $10,000 or $15,000 that we don't think needs to be there, I think we owe it to everyone to be kind of fiscally responsible and have that discussion. So we can either do some of that tonight or not. What I was kind of hoping is that we could talk a little bit about that tonight, and then maybe on Thursday be able to have like a scenario from Christine and Nick to look at based on what some of us have thoughts on for that. So I just wanted to mention that and have that in the back of our minds if people are okay with that. And then I think at some point we can probably start voting on the budgets, and I'm kind of thinking we could do a little bit like Scott does, that when we get to it, maybe on Thursday, we'll go down and hold the ones we want to talk about and just maybe leave a few out there for further discussion rather than going through every single line item individually, if that works for people. Because I know we haven't voted on any of them yet. Okay. All right. Christine, do you want to do your CARES stuff or
Nate,
whatever you want to do?
if you can just bring up the CARES breakdown that we had today.
Give me 1 second.
He's probably trying to make sure he doesn't show us a baby picture. But I'm kind of thinking that you should swing in a baby picture at some point, Nick, because we haven't seen one.
Not really a baby anymore, unfortunately.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like, a year has passed.
So one of the reasons we wanted to go over this with you, I know we've talked about it at the selectmen's meetings the last few, and I've been promising them an update, and we just haven't had a chance with working on the budget to get all of this in front of you. So this is where we are currently on the CARES funding that we received. So as you know, back in, I think it was in May when we received it, we received 1.137 in our first stimulus package from the state and federal government. This came through the Commonwealth and had very strict rules as to how we could spend this. So we created a process because we were promised, threatened, I guess I could say, promised from DOR that there would be an audit when we got to the end of this, whether it was before the end of the year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there would be an audit on this CARES stimulus funding. So knowing that I'm the person who signs off on the certification of CARES, I made every department, when they submitted an invoice, had to provide me with a statement as to what the project or item they were purchasing was, what it was going to be used for, and how it met that CARES eligibility. We tried to be as creative as possible with all of our items that came in requesting funding. And we went back to the state several times asking for approval on things that we weren't, maybe we're on the fence about. We asked the state to provide us clarification on that. So this is where we are now. We've expended the total amount. We are still waiting. This spreadsheet also includes our Fema reimbursements. And as you know, with the new administration, there was a change in FEMA. We were only eligible for 75% of those expenses, and that has since been changed to 100%. So we're waiting to find out what that will mean for Medfield. So currently we've expended all of this before we talk about the next stimulus package coming to the town. So just to give you a breakdown, that's where we are. Obviously, a lot of the things that the schools and the town spent it on were PPE, remote, for schools, remote learning. For us on the town side, it was remote work. We were able to do some salaries on both sides. So I will send this out to you. And then if you have any specific questions or would like to see the invoices or want to know exactly what the items that were purchased within these breakdowns, and these are the categories that the DOR has set up for that CARES funding. So if you'd like more information, let me know and we can provide you with the full invoice breakdown of this. But this is where we are as of today. As of today. And then and then we were notified over the weekend that we can anticipate 1.28 million in the next round, which is the American Rescue Plan funds. There is also an amount of funding that's going to Norfolk County that we're trying to determine. The Norfolk County town administrators are trying to determine what Norfolk County is going to do with those funds. And we have already started to lay the groundwork that money needs to be turned over to the town. So I'll keep you updated on that as well.
That ought to be a fun meeting.
Yeah, there were some fun emails over the weekend. I can tell you right now, you saw what I sent out. We have kind of a 35,000 foot view of what is eligible for spending, but we don't have specifics. We do know that it'll most likely be distributed in 2 different funding cycles, but other than that, we don't have a ton of information, at least on specifics. But I know everybody has an idea of what they'd like to spend it on, most of which shared it with me this weekend, which was great. So that's where we are as of today with both of those.
Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions, or and we can, do you guys want to talk about what, I know I have thoughts on what we're gonna potentially do about some of the things in the 420, and I can get on my soapbox and say that. And I also have some thoughts about the, about the 1.2 and whatnot. Is it helpful for people for us to just have a little bit of an open discussion like that for a few minutes? Because then Christine and Nick are gonna, be going back to those selectmen to get their thoughts and then be working on a proposal. So I didn't know if, since we get to meet first this week, whether or not we wanted to throw out our opinions and be first on the record rather than last on the record, and then vote afterwards and not say that we didn't have a chance to say something.
Yeah, I'll be happy to pitch in, as you would expect.
Go ahead, Bob. Start us off.
As unaccustomed as I am, I think it's really important that that as we go through this, we don't see it as an opportunity to just cover the problem and move on to the next step. And specifically, I'm talking about some of the fiscal disciplines that we've been putting in place over the last 2 years. That recognizing that this is a one-time, hopefully, item, even though it's the second round of a one-timer, and that to the extent that it can help us work forward on some of the other items we've talked about, whether it's long-term, whether it's stabilization. What I wouldn't like to see us do is to, as I say, cover up issues that will have to be, addressed in the future by, sustaining spending issues that, keep coming back. So, on a recurring cost, I'd be very cautious about thinking we can put those to use to cover here, whilst using it for other items that strengthen our position, or maybe use over a 3 to 5 year kind of a period would be kind of my thought. I don't know if I articulated that properly, but basically, let's stick to the fiscal discipline we've got, and in terms of budgetary issues, but where there are, clear items that are addressed because of COVID, that's a different issue, but that's kind of my opening salvo.
Thanks, Bob. Does anybody else have anything?
Are there any, as we're going in this conversation or coming up with ideas, are there any constraints or guidance at this point, or is anything and everything on the table, or is there some framework to the way the funds can be spent?
So we don't have specifics on how it can be spent. It's clear that we cannot spend it for any sort of tax cut. They would like to see it, and there's a list of items that they would like to see happen. I'm cautiously optimistic that there will be less constraints than there was on the CARES funding. I think the town administrators, and mayors have been clear in lobbying that the cities and towns don't need to buy more PPE at this point. We're fairly well stocked, but what we need to do is replace a lost revenue, which is one of the items that it allows you for. So we're really waiting for more of those specifics. I'm sure you guys are facing the same thing in Natick, looking for direction. Which is great that we're talking about big picture ideas of how to spend it, but hopefully we'll have that within the next week or so and be able to finalize that.
And I guess I kind of reinforce what Bob mentioned, in that these are one-time funds. It's even less secure than free cash coming in. It's one time, it's a windfall. Generally best to spend it on things that are one-offs as well. It seems like they've put some heavy emphasis on, they've called out water infrastructure specifically. the town happens to have a project in the works that way, that might use some offsetting of cost. That would make it, that project would be an equitable savings for all in the community that drink water. So, if that's one idea. But I mirror Bob's thoughts as far as not using this as a Band-Aid for a systemic budget issue.
And this could
Christine,
be, this could be used out through what, 23 or 24? I forget what the year was, but we can go multiple years with this.
This has to be spent, I believe, by 2024, and then some of the money there'll be additional school money that goes directly to the schools, and I believe that has a 2023 expiration on it.
Okay.
So this is, I guess, a process question, since I'm not really sure how many times this has ever happened to any of us in our lifetimes before. Like, since we know the number now, do we have to put that in as an income line? And then if we don't know what we're spending it on now, it's like a transfer to stabilization or something, and then we take it out before the deadline?
No, I would say no, because
Okay.
that's not how we received the CARES funding.
Okay.
So it depends on how they're going to do it. Back in 2000, I think it was 2009 or 2010, we were kind of given the money to spend however the town saw fit. There were no restrictions on it, really. So it depends on how they disperse it. I mean, the CARES for us was on a reimbursement model. So we had to provide the invoices and then reconcile what we were doing for reimbursements. So that's the part I'm cautiously optimistic that won't be how this is done.
Like, this might be like, here's a quarterly check or something like that.
If we didn't spend it, it's going to close to, it would close to free cash if they allowed us to treat it as a revenue. But we don't have any guidance from DOR.
You don't know yet if you can
No.
do that.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add in what was the one slight difference from here and CARES is CARES was given to Massachusetts first, which then dispersed it. So they also had rules to put on top of the federal rules, whereas some of this money will come straight from the federal government. And so who knows what kind of rules will come with those as well. And that's what we're waiting for from the Treasury Department.
Gotcha. And so to circle this into our deficit of $400-something thousand now, if we wanted to use some of this for that, is that we add that as we're getting a pile of a couple $100,000 of stimulus, and we don't say we're getting $1.2 million, we say we're getting whatever it is that we want to use against these things. Is that what we do?
Yeah, I think if you were going to take that approach, then you would treat it as an other available revenue source.
Gotcha. And so then I'm thinking that us as a committee, when we're talking about a balanced budget, is like, how big of a number are we okay with that versus kind of what we want to push back on line items? Is that fair to say?
I think so.
Okay.
A little of both.
A little bit of both. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So do people feel okay starting to vote on some of the articles we talked about tonight, or do you have more questions on this before we tell Mr. Marcucci he can get out of his closet if he would like? Oh, we have him. I mean, he's welcome to stay all night.
Well, just one comment, Mike, that was interesting in the last meeting going over the Lexington
Oh,
proposal.
yes.
That was, I had never seen that before. I had used something different in the prior town, but that was very interesting. I agree with you that it's a good yardstick, but it's not doesn't necessarily mean it's the norm. Very interesting.
That's put a lot of work into that. And it's an interesting analysis.
It is.
And thank you, Ed, for bringing that up, because I had forgotten that was one of my bullet points I had wanted to mention in this, because I don't think we've ever had as a committee, at least since I've been here, ever kind of like a discussion on that. And I know that Gus would definitely appreciate it if we had a discussion about it after his presentation. So did people get a chance to see Gus's presentation, or do you need a primer on what the Lexington model is. And you're welcome to say no, Amanda, if you were too busy with your kids, then we can explain it.
A primer would be appreciated.
All right. So a primer on this goes back a few years, and Gus had first kind of brought the Lexington model, and Christina, Nick, and Mike, please correct me if I start to get any of this wrong. But the idea behind it basically is you take how much you have in revenues, and then you split it out kind of percentage wise, and each kind of piece of town gets their slice of it. So if you decide that it should be 25% for town services and 75% for schools, you allot those buckets. You do not go out of your lane. That's what that spreadsheet kind of does. And then I think, at least in the model that Gus has been using, it's been 75-25. I think there's been discussion that other towns use different pieces of it. That is my incredibly short Cliff Notes version of what it is.
I think one of the interesting comments that was made, and correct me, Mike, if I heard it incorrectly, but without using the Lexington model, if when Gus went back, I think it was 10 years, just by the way that we balanced the budget, it turned out consistent with the.
That's what we were doing, and we didn't realize we were
doing it. You know, we were kind of following it without following it.
Right. So I think that the question that has been posed to us as a committee is whether or not the town should quote unquote adopt it, since we already do it, or is it just a tool in the toolbox that it's a very interesting piece of information that may help guide some people's decisions, but or it may not. And so I personally think it's the second. I see it as a tool in the toolbox. I think it's incredibly fascinating that he put it through for the last 10 years and we've always done it. But I guess my opinion on that is like, well, that's great. So clearly we do that. But I feel like there are different situations that come up. I mean, heck, we're in a pandemic, right? So you can't, if you can't say if it was, now if it just so works out that it ends up being 75-25, then I figure that's kind of luck, you know, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, you listen to a lot of the school budget discussions and, you know, one of their massive drivers is special ed. And the special ed is not something that any of them can control sometimes, because it's about who lives here and who might need to have a tuition. Like there are different pieces in that. And then, you know, the capital budget comes along and, you know, what happens if the new fire truck falls off the road on Causeway and ends up in the swamp and now we're stuck, you know? You just don't know, I guess, is what's going to happen. So if you put yourself in those lanes and say you never can leave those lanes, like that's kind of where I'm at. So I don't know what everybody else thinks, but
I would agree. You can't just have a formula driven way to balance the budget. You've got to look at it differently every single year, depending upon the circumstances. When you go through that model, it is, you know, you come down to the available revenue and then you say, okay, then Chapter 70 goes to the schools, unrestricted government aid goes to the town, and you add that to their budgets. But that's, you know, we're talking about one town, one budget, and that's divisive just in doing that, just to begin with. So, you know, again, it's a good yardstick, but I think, and it tells you directionally which way you should be thinking in a given year, but you still have to look at every year differently and do what you think is best. And as we said before, it's kind of fallen into that 75-25 range anyways.
You know, I would agree too with you saying, Ed, because there are variables in there, and you know, there's the way you come down to the available revenue after fixed costs and variable costs. I mean, there are judgments that lead to the amount, quote, available, and then so I think it's a very good yardstick because it does. it would beg the question, what's different about this particular year? If we went through it and said, oh boy, it used to be 75-25 consistently, and all of a sudden it's 5 plus or minus something, 10-15% off of those numbers. So I think as a gauge, both historical and judgmental, it's helpful. But I can't see, with all the variables that we have to address, that we could tie ourselves down to this is the model and we're gonna use this. It's a good dialogue discussion between the Warrant Committee and the selectmen from that perspective. And I think it's good. It's good and useful as a tool, not the tool, from my perspective.
Well,
Anybody
we
else?
should look at it every year.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to look at for sure.
Mike, is the selectman leaning towards one way, and maybe like, do they favor one way, or are you more like using it as a guideline type?
I think Gus would like to make it the rule. And I think if you gave Gus absolute authority, I don't want to speak for him, but he and I have had enough sufficient hours of discussion on this that I think he would like to see this adopted as the overall rubric. I don't think Pete and I agree. I think, and again, I think it's a useful exercise. I mean, my biggest problem with it as a prescriptive device is that it doesn't take into account the variability in the costs of providing those services. So it kind of assumes that all the services we're providing cost the same over time, which may be true, it may not be true, given that the biggest cost on all sides is personnel, and those costs do tend to move together with kind of how government employees are paid across the board and paid across with their peers. So it may be that assumption is correct. I just think it's an untested assumption at this point, because some things do get cheaper to provide, some get more expensive to provide, and so you still have to take into account what it is you're doing, and it's not exactly the same in each of those buckets. So that's kind of the conceptual difficulty I have with it as a normative device, but analytically I think it's pretty interesting.
Right. Okay. Do we want to discuss the articles that were talked about today? Do people feel prepared? Did you get enough information to vote on the planning articles and the capital budget articles we talked about today? I'm going to take that silence as a resounding yes.
Before you start voting, Sharon, am I dismissed, or do you still
You
would
are
like me to stay?
dismissed.
Okay.
You can go.
Yeah. I'm gonna
have
go
a
back. I'm gonna go
wonderful-
back to my day job, which I do
Go.
also from this same
Okay.
luxurious office. So,
Yes.
but good to see you all.
Thank you
for coming,
very
Mike.
much.
Thank you.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. So want to.
Sharon, on the
Yeah.
capital budget,
Mhm.
I wanted to do a little calculation before I was comfortable voting.
That's fine. That's fine. We don't have to vote on it today. We still got 4 more meetings before we're going to the warrant hearing. I can't even think of the name. So yeah, that's totally fine. Any of these things that anybody's not, I think what we might do, we can do the ones that we had talked about first if people are fine. Do you not want to vote on either of them? Because it probably makes sense to do them both at the same time. Does that make sense, Jeremy? Like, I didn't know if you were not comfortable with the 750 and the appropriation, or if you weren't comfortable voting on the list of the 704, we just want to hold them all and do them together.
I probably makes sense to do them together, but
Okay.
I mean, it's more on the list proposed than the number.
Okay.
The overall fund.
I'm fine with that. We can hold on that. So Christine, do we want to do your planning ones then?
Yeah, did anyone have any other questions?
No.
I think the
don't.
solar one is pretty straightforward. I think the zoning diagnostic, I think it's necessary, and it's, I think it's just more of a question whether we can afford to do that this year, but I think it is a necessary tool and an exercise that the planning board, needs to go, or we need to have good bylaws. zoning is dynamic in that it needs to evolve and change as, you know, to be consistent with like future development that we want going on in town. So I think it's necessary. I don't know, do people have an issue with the $20,000 request?
I'm gonna be honest, it's on my list of things that I would take out of the 420. If I was gonna come up with a list of trying to get the 420 down some. The only reason why I say that is because I feel like we could push it out a year and do it next year rather than this year. Philosophically, I think it's a great idea. I'm trying not to be swayed by the fact that we could say that we have some extra money to play with, because last week when we didn't have extra stimulus money to play with, it was on my list. So I'm trying to remember that it was on my list, along with a couple of other articles that required money. But I mean, I hear what Sarah is saying, and I think that it's good for the town. I'm just wondering if we have to do it this year, I guess is my only question.
Yeah, I kind of agree that it was on my list of items that, you know, that would be variable. But I would be okay to, from my perspective, hold off and see how some of the other pieces on the budget settle.
I agree with that totally, Bob.
Like maybe like table this one until we do the operating
Yeah,
budget
I
as a
wouldn't,
whole.
because I think, you know, there's a lot of, there are moving parts here that might give us better clarity on the 420 and the like, because I do agree with you. I think it makes sense. You know, as Christine says, it's something we should do, but whether we need to do it in the current year is still kind of up in the air. That's my thought.
No, I
So
would
are
agree.
so we're all good to just table this one too. We are voting these things right along, I tell you. 3 tables in a row. Okay, how about our solar voltaic doesn't cost us any money? Go ahead, Newton.
Right, so would we be voting on the solar article, Article 33?
I'm okay voting on Article 33 for the solar. Is everybody else
Yeah.
cool with that? Okay. Does anybody have any questions or anything on what we heard or opinions? I'm good with solar. I hope that nobody decides to put it in their front yard blocking their house, but right?
Particularly.
So
60 feet back should give a little bit of.
I feel like I saw something on 60 Minutes about this, like somebody who had put a giant one in their front yard. I can't remember where I saw it. It's like the only visual I get, and I'm just gonna. I think solar is a wonderful idea, and I'm just gonna hope that everybody.
I don't know enough about it, but would a solar panel that size, you know, that you put over your driveway, would that be economical? I mean, what would it power? You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I think Sarah was saying that those ground mounted ones that are under 10 kilowatts or under, the small ones, it's only like 2 panels. So who knows how much, you know, it could generate. So it seems small.
Yeah. Leo has a question in the chat that I don't know the answer to. He wants to know, what if his roof is not 60 feet back?
Yeah.
I don't think that matters because it's on his roof,
the roofs
right?
are by right.
It's on the
Yeah,
roof.
it's not,
Yeah,
it's a
your
roof,
roof
so
is
it's by
fine.
right.
Yeah.
So
Look
you
at that,
can-
Leo. We all answered it all at the same time.
I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's on the roof. We're okay.
Well, it's only when it would be an accessory structure off the roof that would need the
Yeah,
60.
like a ground mounted one.
Yeah. Like, what if I wanted to put him on the roof of my doghouse?
Have at it.
Oh, look at that. I don't even have a doghouse. I'm just saying. I'm just trying to be difficult.
Dogs and heat.
Yeah. Did everybody catch Ed's joke? Because it was great if you missed it. Okay. All right. Well, then do we have a motion unless anybody has any other questions about this one?
Motion to approve the Article 33 or whatever article for the solar bylaw
I
amendment.
think it is 33,
Yeah,
unless
it's-
Christine's changed it again.
Second.
Okay.
Call it by
all
its
right.
title, not by its number.
Well, I have a spreadsheet that does both. I already renumbered it before this meeting started, so I'm gonna have to renumber it again. Okay, we've had a motion and a second, so therefore, Bob Slimey,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
Newton,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, so 1 out of 3. That's good. All right, so I don't know if we have other articles that we can vote on. I will, go ahead, Newton.
So last week, we tabled the Lot 1 disposition.
Yes,
And, I think Christina.
and yes, and the selectmen did talk about it at their meeting, so we could go back to that one.
Well, you could,
Or,
you could,
Did they add language to?
but we are, to make it more clear, we are changing that article, amending it, I should say, to be the disposition of lot 1 and lot 3.
and there goes the numbering system.
No,
So,
it's the same, it's the same.
Yeah, 3 dropped off.
It'll be incorporated in one article,
okay,
but it's.
so
gonna
in
be-
other words, we're tabling that one
you're gonna
also.
table it, Yeah.
Okay, we're doing really well. All right.
What did the selectmen say though about proceeds?
So the selectmen said that we can feel confident that it would go into a stabilization fund, not the general spending. They
So
did
the-
not pick which
Okay.
one. Mark Sorrell said that it would have to be in one that would have a similar spending useful life.
5 years or more, I think.
5 years, yeah.
So there,
Yeah.
there was like a statutory requirement that it only be spent on something that has a useful life of 5 years or more. So that rolls out operating budget.
Right.
Okay.
So, but I think it could go into capital
Land or
stabilization, right? Or
stabilization.
Free cash.
something like that.
All right,
We did
so-
get an answer.
So we're waiting for new language to vote?
The only thing that's changing on that is I'm adding lot 3.
Okay.
That's the only thing to that article. In
Do you
20.
think you'll add lot 3 to it by Thursday and we could vote for it on Thursday?
Yes,
Okay, no pressure.
Perfect.
it's already, I'll send you a new version.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we're gonna do the citizen petitions on the 22nd, and my plan was we were also going to do the historic district commission one also. However, we are going to push that one out because Christine talked to them and they need more time.
Mhm. Yeah, so
Okay.
I think he wants to come back. He wants to have like an internal meeting with the his committee and then circle back with us maybe sometime in the beginning of April.
So, so we will do the 2 citizen petitions on the 22nd, so that way our meeting on Thursday, we can talk more about the operating budget and kind of we'll go down those line by line and we can have a bigger discussion about, we can also do the articles. Maybe we can talk about the planning board one again, like the ones that had to do with money. We can talk about the economic thing for the selectmen vitality. Is that what it is? The ones that have to do with money, we could talk about. We could maybe plan to that be our discussion on the 18th. On the 22nd, we'll do citizens petitions. I've come up with a proposed process for what we could do because I believe that we are going to have folks both for those articles and against those articles that have reached out that would like to speak. So in order for us to not be here for longer than our 2 hours, I'm proposing that we're going to give a set allotment for the people that are for it to give us a presentation, and then the people that are against it to give us a presentation, and then we can ask them questions, but to try to keep each article to a half an hour.
Sharon, can you
work for
remind me,
people?
what are the 2 citizens petitions again?
Sure, they are on last week's versions, Article 36 and 37. And so they both have to do with the elementary school and the school building. So 36, the way it reads now, Article 36 is to see if the town will vote to recommend the Medfield School Committee and School Building Committee to amend its proposal to the Massachusetts School Building Authority to keep Dale Street School at its current site for grades 4 and 5. And then it goes on. And then 37 is to see if the town will vote to establish a committee charged and create a Medfield town bylaw to govern school projects, the school building committee appointment process led by the town moderator in keeping with the Medfield public school policy. So those are the two. I didn't, Christine did for me, reached out to Mark Sorrell to make sure that he could come to that meeting, because I think that we just have some general questions as to how those would work, that we might have some questions for Mark. So I think Mark can come on Monday, right? So that's why we're going to try to do it Monday. So if there is, I'm going to reach out to the folks that are both behind these petitions, as well as others that have reached out, and hopefully the 22nd works for everyone. And then we can devote an hour of our meeting to these two. And then we could cover any other articles that might be ready by then. Does that work, everyone?
Yeah, I think, I'm the Warrant Committee
No,
non-voting
really, this is your job.
member on the school building, and my point to, and I think Sharon's got a great approach, because it's the purpose of the meeting for our perspective, I think, is to have the presentation of what the article is, as we do with other departments, and not have an evening of debate. That's for the town meeting to do. At least that's my perspective. So what I would like to see us do is get an articulation of the purpose of the article, get a sense of what the reasons, if it's a quick brief discussion on it, certainly get a perspective from the town council as to what this is, because I think what it means in terms of affecting bylaws, and then give us a perspective. But it's up to the town to make the decision. It's just a question for us to understand what it is that these two articles are endeavoring to accomplish.
On something like this, do we have to weigh in with a yay or a nay on these? So these are just citizens' positions, but we have to take a position?
Yes, the Medfield town bylaws state that the Warrant Committee will provide a recommendation and be heard at every article at town meeting.
Okay.
Fun. When it gets fun, Ed. See, you should have asked that question, Ed, before you joined.
I want to change the charter so that we're the finance committee, Christine. We have no business in this non-financial stuff. We're just another citizen.
Speaking of
But the
finance,
citizens want your opinion, which is why we are a warrant committee giving our opinion. Did you have a question, Newton?
yeah, not a question, but speaking of finance stuff, yes, it is a question for Nick or Christine. Will the water and sewer enterprise funds be ready to be reviewed by the Water and Sewer Board on Thursday so that the Warrant Committee could vote on them? Or are those much later dated? Is that a later dated item, warrant article? That is the enterprise funds.
We can review them, but they won't have the final numbers in them. The Personnel Board has voted on the cost of living increase, but that has not been voted on by the Board of Selectmen. And they will do that at their meeting next Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
That article also includes the allocated cost assessment, which will also be finalized. That can happen after, but again, that just lags behind everything a little bit just because of how that calculation is done.
Sure, and that's just a given from the town that the funds have to support. So while we have the Water and Sewer Board, it might be a good idea to go through their budget numbers, their revenue and their expenses, other than the ones that are more top of the house or allocated to them. That's a question. So while we have them, can we look at something for those enterprises? Numbers.
No, I'm sorry. I don't think I got the question part of it. I'm sorry.
Will all the numbers that are available, if the Water and Sewer Board is prepared, be available to review at the Warrant Committee on the 18th?
Oh, I don't see why not.
So you have revenue and you have direct expense, certainly for water and sewer. I'm just trying to cover that warrant article as much as possible while we have the board with us.
While they're here on Thursday.
Yeah, I'll talk to Mo in the morning, but I don't think it should be an issue.
Okay, so,
It might be a surprise to Water and Sewer, but we'll get them prepped.
okay. And then something circulated to the warrant committee members to review. Okay.
Absolutely.
But the big action on Thursday, from my point of view, is the water treatment plant.
Right.
And so if anyone wants to tune into the Board of Selectmen meeting tomorrow night, the Water and Sewer Board is making a presentation. Essentially what we're going to see, I think, Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a presentation by Bill Harvey, the Water and Sewer Board Chairman. There may be even an expert opinion or the consultant results from environmental partners. If you want to do a little reading on your own, you can go to the Water and Sewer Board site. The water treatment plant project preliminary design reports out there. The executive summary is just 6 pages. It's been out there for a while. You can look at that. But all those might prep you in addition to watching tomorrow night for our meeting on Thursday.
You have a question from Leo Brum in the chat. He would like to know, did the discussion happen about the second round of funds? I feel it was glossed over too quickly.
So yes, I think we glossed over it quickly, but only because we don't have an answer yet. And so I think that our intention was to basically state what our feelings were about it and to get some information, but I think we're going to have a further discussion on that after we see where we want the current 420 to land, just in order to be able to say how much we would be okay with it putting in other available funds. Does that sound accurate to everyone?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. We just need 420. Leo was saying, great, we just need
more
420.
time spent on this. Yes.
That's right. There will be more time spent on it, and there are some things that maybe we just need to have a discussion, like we were, hence why we tabled the planning board and why we're going to table the other ones that have to do with money. We'll probably talk more about.
I'm going to guess the Board of Selectmen are going to have a lot to say about it too. So
that's right. So I assume they'll probably talk about it tomorrow. They have a meeting every Tuesday this month, right?
yeah, it's not on the agenda to talk about tomorrow. So I don't know if we'll cover it depending on how long the water treatment plant discussion goes. And I'm hoping it's hard to talk about when we don't have any guidance.
Right.
As to how we, other than the preliminary guidance that we have. So.
Right. Sounds good. Okay.
Can I just add something? Since Mo's going to be here on the 18th to talk about the water treatment facility as part of that, there's also a proposed article for the stormwater bylaw as well. So he'll be here to talk about that as well. There's an article in the warrant on that.
Okay.
And is that that must be yours, Christine?
Mm-hmm.
Will you give him a heads up?
Yeah, he knows.
Okay, good.
Cool. All right. We have lots of fun things on the agenda for Thursday. I just want to run down the list super quick to see if there's any that maybe we can do tonight, because I saw one that I don't think that we did, that I'm wondering whether or not we can. I don't think we actually ever voted on the PEG access cable related funds one, and it is written a sum of money. Like, do we really have to have the sum of money?
You don't have to have the sum of money until the motion at town meeting. And while we like to give people an idea, especially where we're talking about spending money, I like to give that ahead of time for them to review before we get to town meeting. This is a transfer to Medfield TV, and I like to keep it open so that sometimes we get payments in a week before town meeting. And if we don't, it'd just be better if we held off to just sum of money, but you can vote on it.
I have us having voted on the 22nd of February. Does anyone
Okay,
else?
well, see, I made mine yellow with the 22nd, but then I went back to the minutes and I didn't see it. But maybe that's just me.
It's not in the minutes. I'll have to revise them.
Oh, shush. Well, see, I have on the 22nd that we did the DOT ride sharing funds and the landfill lease.
Okay.
Why don't we vote on it again just to be safe? Does that work for people? Because I'm not positive if we did.
I have it on my list that you passed it.
Yeah.
We did pass it.
Okay, well then, then maybe we need to, can we reopen the minutes from the 22nd and amend them? Because I don't think that they're in there unless I'm reading the wrong one that I just opened.
Okay.
So I'm going to do that real quick before we forget. How's that? Can I vote to amend the minutes from, or I move to amend the minutes from February 22nd to add that we voted unanimously in favor of the article to do the transfers for the PEG access cable related funds.
Second.
Okay. Ed?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So it's going to be marked green on mine now, even though it may have been voted on twice. Okay. All right. I assume we still can't do the personal administration plan. Is that true?
That is correct.
Okay. And we're skipping the COVID and the operating. We're tabling capital and also the leases, and we're clearly not doing water and sewer. We'll also table the economic vitality and sewer betterments, lot 1.
So sewer betterments paid in advance is coming off.
Well, alrighty then.
I know.
Okay.
I wait to the end right before I get off before I tell you I messed up your numbering.
Okay, that's
Let's keep
fine.
meeting. Motion to adjourn.
Listen. Can we do any of the solar articles yet? Yeah, Newton, go ahead.
Can you give us a 1-minute explanation why that comes off? Isn't that pretty standard each and every year?
It is, only we are at the end of the 20 years for sewer betterments, so it will close to free cash.
Okay.
We won't transfer the money into the sewer betterment stabilization fund. It'll close out to free cash, and then
So
that's it.
the relevant debt is paid?
Correct. It will be this year and then next year, and then there won't be any reason to have that fund
Article anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's hard to believe it's been 20 years since that project.
Crazy. And the 3 solars we can't do yet. We still don't have that.
I was just going through the language tonight, and I will get that out to everybody. I apologize. Nick got it to me about a week and a half ago, and I haven't had a chance to look at it.
You're allowed. Can we do, I should have asked this while Margucci was here. Is that the appropriate funds for the Affordable Housing Trust something we can do, or is that still? I suppose that has money with it, so that goes in our group of tabling because of money.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, the only other ones left are the collective bargaining. Can we do those ones yet?
No, I would like you to hold off. I'd like to do all of them at the same time. Selectmen will finalize the police agreement tomorrow night, and then we can talk about all of them.
Okay. Well, if anybody,
Sharon, the selectmen did talk about that disposition on lot 1, where the funds would go. Was it Article 19? Is that still?
well, Christine just told us earlier that she's changing it so that it's lots, what? 1
Oh,
and
okay.
3.
I don't understand that. Great.
She just
That's the
kept
one.
putting it in my little
Got it.
tabling.
Got it. Sorry.
So
Got it.
yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
So unless anybody else wants to do anything or talk about anything, we can probably go home 11 minutes early since we have to table everything.
We have to
Approve his, Newton's minutes.
Oh, that's right, Newton's minutes. Yes. Okay.
They were very
All the
late.
work that goes into my.
Yes, thank you. Newton's minutes. I am good with Newton's minutes. Did anybody else have any?
Speaking of my minutes,
Yes.
my records don't show anything about the PEG vote back on the 22nd.
Do we want to vote
Well-
on the PEG thing just to be?
Because it's Ed's article, and I don't have any notes either typed or otherwise. And I don't mean to make a big deal about it, but we just voted this.
I know we just voted it, so do we need to undo that and then
Oh.
vote for the PEG thing? This is very confusing.
Yeah.
All right,
I'm-
Christine, you get to decide. What do we do now?
Just vote it right now.
Okay.
I would just vote
All
it again.
Okay.
Vote early and often when it comes to PEG.
Okay, so PEG, Article 4. Is there a motion about Article 4, the PEG transfer to Medfield TV?
I'll make a
Motion to approve.
Okay, all right. Is there a second?
Second,
Okay, Bob,
Yes.
Ed,
yes.
Newton,
yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And so
Yep.
unanimously carries. And
I'm gonna call Brett at Medfield TV and tell him of all the warrant articles.
that
No
was,
discussion has been about the PEG grant.
I'd like to point out, it's
Better
almost the
read
only
it.
thing we were able to actually, well, no, it's not the only thing we accomplished. It's the only thing we actually voted on twice, I guess. So anyway, all right. Does anybody have any other?
Motion to
Questions or
approve the
concerns,
March
or-
8th minutes.
All right.
Second.
And all right. So Bob,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
Newton,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. And Bob, here I was thinking that you were going to just jump right to moving to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, Bob. Ed,
Yes.
Newton,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
and Christine,
Yes.
Jeremy.
Yes.
Wonderful. I would like to point out that we are actually the Brady Bunch when we're 9.
Oh, that's cute.
And Christine tonight, at least on my screen, is my Alice. So anyway, it's too late. But thank you all. So, and I will see you Thursday with
See you
lots of
Thursday.
water and sewer discussion.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Good night,
Okay.
Thanks,
Right.
guys.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.